Hi, this is Michael from MV Music Lessons, and this lesson I'm going to be going over augmented and diminished chords. This is going to be my music theory lesson on that. So last video we learned about major and minor chords. I'll kind of write out what that was. So I'll start with major. Now you should remember this. You should know this, because as we move on, you need to remember everything from previous videos. If you don't remember, you can go back and check it out. So major, we said it was an interval of a major third, then a minor third. So what that means is we were on the C, and we did that, because this is a major third because we have two whole steps, and then this is a minor third because we have a whole step then a half step right here. Whole step, half step. So that was major. And then minor we said was minor and then major. So if we were on C, that would go from here to there to the G. It's easier to see it on an A because that's just, you know, a naturally occurring thing on the white keys. It's weird to try to draw arrows to the black keys and, you know, make weird diagrams all over the keyboard. That just doesn't make sense. It's easier just to see it like that. In minor, we had the minor interval first, then the major. Major third. I keep saying interval because we haven't really gotten into what thirds and fourths and things like that are yet. We'll get into that in a video pretty soon, but just know that right now we're just working with major and minor thirds. So, with that being said, this video we're going over two new chords. I'll just abbreviate them because they're kind of long. They're a lot longer to write out than major or minor. So we have augmented and diminished. Now, they almost explain what they are. Augmented, you know, you'd think of stretching something out. Augmented usually means to make something bigger. So if we go by that logic, if we have something up here we want to make it bigger, well, a minor interval, minor third, that's pretty small. We want to make that bigger. So, you know, it doesn't really matter which one you take. You're always going to make the minor bigger if you wanted to think about it that way. If you just want to memorize it, it's just major, major third, and major third. So what that would look like, if we started on the C, we would go from C, there's a major third, to the E, then here's another major third. So we would go up to, well, I have it labeled here in A sharp, but technically we would probably say this was a G sharp, because normally if this was just a major chord, we would be on the G, but since we're augmenting it, we're making bigger, it would go up a note, and if it goes up, we say it's a G sharp. We weren't on the A, we didn't go down. If we were on the A, that would have been A minor, technically, because this A basically would be like circling this one over here, and then we just have a minor chord. But we didn't do that. We were on the G, we went up, we made it bigger. So right there, this would be a G sharp. So just ignore that right there. Now there, we have our augmented chord. It's stretched out, made bigger. Now if you want to know what that sounds like, it doesn't really sound that pleasant. You know, major and minor chords, they work. They sound nicer to our ears. Even though minor is kind of sad, it still doesn't sound awful. I wouldn't say augmented and diminished chords sound awful if they're used the right way, but just by themselves, they don't sound too pleasant. I'll go ahead and go play an augmented chord. I'll play the one that I have circled here, and you'll be able to see what I mean. So that could be used for something, but it's really not that great by itself. And now if you've been paying attention, you might have figured out what a diminished is, because the diminished pretty much explains what it is too. If something's diminished, it's smaller. So if we were going to make these chords smaller, we would do two minor right next to each other. So, well, actually, let me get rid of the other circles up there. There we go. We have minor, then minor. And that's what a diminished chord is. So if we started on the C, we would go from C, we'd do a minor interval, That would land us on this E flat, and now technically this would actually be the E flat because we were on the E and we went down. We would label it as an E flat. And now if we were on the G, we would go down to the G flat because up from the E flat we do one whole step and then a half step, we land on this. So now we would say G flat because we were on the G and we went down. So there's our diminished chord. Now this one has a different sound than the augmented, but it still sounds kind of bad. They have the same kind of qualities. Like, they're not really pleasant to hear unless you kind of use them in the context of other chords and they kind of stand out. They can be used to make really good sounding music, but just by themselves they're really not that great to listen to. I'll go ahead and play this chord so you can kind of see how a diminished chord sounds. So now what I'm going to do, I'll play an augmented chord and then I'll play the diminished. I'll do the augmented one key at a time, then all together, then the diminished one key at a time, then all together. And you can kind of see the difference between them. So you can tell they really have a nasty kind of sound to them. But, you know, people use that in music, and it actually turns out really good if you know what you're doing. And hey, that's why you're watching these videos, because you'll be able to learn how to use those chords and make them sound good. So now, just so that you can kind of remember, if you don't remember already, I'll just go and play a major and a minor chord in that order, and you'll be able to kind of hear how those sound good, and how the augmented and diminished really don't if you just have them all by themselves. So yeah. Here, I'll do the major and then the minor. So you can really see how they all have their own distinct sound. And these are the main kinds of chords that you're going to work with. Most of the time it's just going to be major and minor. But in the next video I'll get into scales and how these chords relate to the scale. And really, if you just have a normal major scale, you're going to have major and minor chords and one diminished chord. And I'll tell you where that'll be in the next video. If you just have a regular scale, you're never going to have an augmented chord, really. You'd have to have some other special kind of scales that we'll get into later to have that. If you really wanted this augmented chord be used, I mean, you could use it. You'd just have to mention that one note is sharp, or, you know, if we started on the C, you'd have to say that the G was G sharp, and then you'd have an augmented chord. If you knew what you were doing, you could write a song and it would sound really good. And we'll get into that later, and you'll be able to write some songs yourself and, you know, see how they sound. If you have a keyboard, you could try playing it. But yeah, we'll get into that in a later video. For right now, this is pretty much it. I don't want to throw too much at you in one video. This is basically it. Just remember this little formula for making different chords. So it's easy to remember major and minor because it's major and minor intervals, and if you're trying to make a major, the major third comes first. If you have a minor, the minor third comes first. And for augmented and diminished, it's kind of easy to remember those. If you can understand that augmented means to be stretched out and diminished means to be shortened. Diminished, you think of something getting smaller. Augmented, it's getting bigger. So for augmented, getting bigger, 2 major thirds. Diminished, getting smaller, 2 minor thirds. So if you can memorize this, you're in pretty good shape, as long as you know all these keys, because in the next video, I'm actually not going to have these up. We're going to have some blank keys up here, and if you don't have this keyboard pretty much memorized, you might get a little lost. So if you don't already have this memorized, I would suggest doing that now before you move on. So for the next video, you're going to need to have keyboard memorized and these patterns. You won't really have to know the augmented because, like I said, this isn't really going to show up in the scale that we're going to do, but it's just good to know. You need to know how to form that kind of chord. That's pretty much it for this video. I'll see you in the next one, and make sure you check out my website. I'll have a link in the description. It's mvrmusiclessons.webs.com. Again, I'll have a link in the description. Go ahead and check that out. It basically has all these videos all nice and organized on one website for you. so that's pretty handy if you're searching all over YouTube for stuff. Yeah, that's basically it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much for checking it out.